the various that came running through town. So we got cholera, we got small yellow fever, all kinds of fun things. The October one is going to be on
Sicilians. You're gonna love it, right? You got Sicilian.
But the French Quarter was Sicilian, that's right. And the November one is going to be on.
Take me out to the ball.
Take me out to the ball
We're
game.
gonna take he knows all the baseball. And I know that the catch is that a lot of the old ballparks exist where they were because you could get to them on the streetcar. So if you talk about something, it's literally shortstop to first.
We're going to be doing some stuff hopefully with our local media station, WYS, because they've got a few new programs coming up. For example, Duke Chase, by Duke, not Duke, he's the fourth, Duke Chase. And I think we were going to do not every this program show. It's going to debut on WYES, so it's going national. And so we took him out here for a food demonstration and a couple of things from WYES. The public will provide.
Did you know that WVU used to be on Channel 12? Yeah. Some people remember that. Yeah. It was on Channel 12, except there was WLOX in Biloxi that was on Channel 13. And as the power on the station got bigger, 12 and 13 were walking away. So the public station agreed to switch with WVUE. And so they became 8 and WYES became 12 because Sesame Street didn't need to go to Biloxi.
Click. Okay, now.
Yeah.
But they're also, Dillard has a television station, but nobody, what's going on with that? Nobody uses it?
Nobody uses it. They have a license, but I don't know if they still right.
Well, they say WYES during the trip.
Oh, that's true.
I forgot about it. Yeah. Okay, everybody, are you now ready for Royal Blue Line? Okay, everybody, this is Ed Branley. He's spoken here several times on various topics. I probably will come back many times in the future. And tonight the subject is the Royal Blue Line, which I never had figured out. And so everybody, please welcome Ed Branley.
When my friend Derby Disclair and I were talking to Chris, and we were like, let's do some talks this fall on history stuff and everything else. And initially we were talking, Chris was like, well, maybe we'll do them over at the old Battery branch. And so that was, it got out of hand and we ended up here, which is all the better because this is the big room with the big TVs and everything else, right? But you guys hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Used to teach high school, so I shouldn't be a problem with that. The only time I've ever had somebody complain about not using a mic or an amplifier was when I was going around doing talks on my Kraus book. That was 2018. And I go to the JCC over at St. Charles Avenue in Jefferson there, and I'm doing a lunch and learn thing, sponsored by Morrison. Yeah, Jewish philanthropy. But anyway, I'm going in, and it's me. And of course, this is what maybe now 9 years ago or so. So I'm in my late 50s, and the young lady who was the program coordinator for the J, she's like barely 30, that kind of thing. And she looks and she hands me the mic and says, "I'll be fine." And she goes, "Trust me, you and I will be the youngest people in this room." And I didn't understand. I used to teach high school. I guess, sorry, I don't throw chalk. Remember, the thing with chalk, by the way, was the strategy was you never wanted to hit the kid. You made sure that you got a little piece of chalk and you threw it right in front of them so that it exploded in powder in front of them. And so then, anyway, but welcome to the Royal Blue Line. So I picked this particular topic, because as I said before I got, going into the weeds there, we were talking about doing talks over at the old Metairie branch, which is on Metairie Road. And my first thought was, well, if we're going to do a talk about streetcars, let's do a talk at the about the streetcar line that went right past the library on Metairie Road, which of all things was the Napoleon Avenue streetcar line that started the run down at Chapatoulas and Napoleon by Tipitina's, by the old Nazi building there, the RTX still owns, worked its way all the way out to Shrewsbury, all the way out to Suburban Airline Highway. And that's how long the Royal Blue Line was at its peak. So I said, what the heck? And of course, I went changing it after that, because I started looking into all the little things I didn't know about the Napoleon line, even though I'd written down, goodness, 3 books specifically about the Canal Street, my streetcar book, plus a book on Maison Blanche, and a book on Krauss. So kind of I know a little bit about the Canal Line and the Esplanade Line and that kind of thing. Napoleon and St. Charles, I went to Brother Martin, grew up kind of out here in Gentilly. Was never an uptown kid. The only time I rode St. Charles streetcar was to get home and back from Delta South. Right? So I learned all kind of neat stuff, dig into all of this. Of course, that is me. I am in the Branley. I am your NOLA history guy. NOLA history guy, all one word, on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, please. I don't do Twitter anymore. Come to the coffee shop and we can have a talk about that. And then, of course, NOLAhistoryguy.com is the website. Streetcars operated on Napoleon Avenue from 1850 till 1953, 103 years. That is longer than any streetcar line in the city other than the St. Charles Avenue line. There's a reason for that that's directly related to St. Charles Avenue, we'll talk about in a second. But even Canal Street started in 1861. This line started in 1850. That is a classic 1923, we call trolley enthusiasts, the folks that work like at RTA in the rail department or in other cities, they'll refer to us as trolley jollies. And they will tell you that is a 1923 vintage Archer streetcar designed by one Pearlie Thomas, which is why they're called Pearlie Thomas cars. That's a picture from the 1940s of one of the Archer cars going heading in to Chapatoulas and Napoleon on Napoleon Avenue. So the Royal Blue Line, why is it called that? Hold that thought, we'll get there. Starts out as what was called the Napoleon branch of the Carrollton line. And it wasn't called the St. Charles line, because nobody cared about St. Charles Avenue when it started in 1831. The purpose of the line was to connect downtown New Orleans with the seat of government for Jefferson Parish, which happened to be the city of Carrollton. And I don't know if you know what used to be the old the Carrollton Courthouse. It's now, what is it like, really expensive assisted living apartments and mixed use stuff and everything else. That was the furthest extent in of Jefferson Parish for some time. So the streetcar line was built or set up to connect the city of Carrollton with downtown New Orleans. So it ran from Marone and Poitras all the way out to Riverbend, to Carrollton Avenue. That line was the Carrollton line. Well, by 1850, now that started running in 1831, but by 1850, the owners of the line, the New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad Company, built a branch or an extension of the Carrollton line, spun it off and built a track and sent that track down to the river on Napoleon. So in 1850, they started running streetcars from St. Charles and Napoleon to Napoleon and Chapatoulas. That line got electrified on February 10th of 1893. It's actually the first streetcar line to be electrified in the city of New Orleans. On your books, the first line was St. Charles line, the old Carroll line, but it was the Napoleon branch of the St. Charles line. Why? Because the power building was that building at Chop and Napoleon. They had to run the wire from Chop and Napoleon up to St. Charles. So the Napoleon line got electrified before the St. Charles line by about 8 hours. So it was electrified in 1893. The Royal Blue Line. Now, so from 1850 till 1903, the Napoleon line was just that branch that ran from St. Charles and Napoleon down to Chapatoulas and Napoleon, basically down to the riverfront. By 1903, another company enters the game here and decides we want to run a streetcar line up Napoleon and points north, basically. And that becomes the Napoleon line, or what would become known as the Royal Blue Line. It was a company called the Orleans and Jefferson Railway Company. That particular company did not last long. This was a very chaotic time for streetcars because electrification was expensive. Mule-drawn streetcars were easy because the fuel the mules run on, right? So it wasn't a terribly difficult. Once you bought your mules and you ran your track, you were pretty easy going. Electricity means you had to generate the power, you had to string the lines. These guys were going bankrupt left and right. But they gave it a shot in 1903. But that particular company did not last long at all because all of them were going bankrupt and were all in a real world of hurt at this point. So the city had stepped in, and this is basically the third attempt at trying to get a citywide streetcar transit company going. It's called New Orleans Railway and Light. And New Orleans Railway and Light starts absorbing all of the legacy companies, including the Orleans and Jefferson Railway. That company doesn't make it either, and ends up becoming New Orleans Public Service Incorporated because General Electric started throwing a ton of money at power companies in other cities. And of course, one of them was New Orleans, and the company that they formed was New Orleans Public Service Incorporated, which was a division of Middle South Utilities, which is to this day Entergy. So you get the idea there. But anyway, yeah, so 1923 it becomes Knoxville. Metairie Road service actually starts in 1903, but gets converted to buses by 1934. So that big long line doesn't last forever. The streetcars themselves are converted from streetcar operation on the Napoleon line to buses in 1953. I don't remember a whole lot of that considering I was born in 1950. So the Napoleon branch is where this starts. This is that beginning piece. So what we're talking about is St. Charles Avenue, mule-drawn streetcars running from downtown, from Canal Road, out all the way along St. Charles Avenue to the riverbed. So if you go to Louisiana Pizza Kitchen, you pretty much get the end of the line at that point. This is a segment of the Robinson Atlas from 1883. I'm going to put all this up on the website as a PDF, so you want to dig and zoom in on the maps and everything, and be able to have it with no problem. This particular segment of the Robinson Atlas is uptown. The middle big street, you can see it there, it says Napoleon, and then the street that's kind of running in the middle in the center of the map, that's St. Charles Avenue. You can see all those black lines there. That's the two streetcar tracks that are running from way into the CBD out to Carrollton Avenue. There in the middle. And then you'll see that the streetcar tracks curve off and kind of hang a turn there. That's the Napoleon branch. So that's St. Charles and Napoleon in the middle, and then it goes out to Chapatoulas and Napoleon. You You've been to Tipitinas, of course you've been to Tipitinas. You've gone past Tipitinas. We're in Tipitinas at 2 a.m. wondering how the hell you're going to get home from a Meters concert in 1974. That's a whole other story. But right across the street from there is now RTA building that was a Nazi building, that was a New Orleans Railway and Light building that basically had everything, serviced a whole bunch of stuff. There was a bunch of reasons why it made sense to run the Napoleon branch even in 1850. And the three big reasons were St. Stephen's Church, which has been around since 1866 or something like that. 1883, you still see St. Stephen's is going to be, see the two squares that are that squared off in red. You go over, go above that to the left a little bit, then that's St. Stephen's. Then the pink building just above that to the right is the old Jefferson City Public Market. You had the French Market, the Treme Market, you had the Britannia Market, and way the heck up here, you had Jefferson City, and of course it was called Jefferson City because Jefferson Parish actually ran up that far at one point. So the public market, and then of course the riverfront. By the time you got to Napoleon, you had a combination of wharves, riverfront operations for river and shipping, plus the stockyards. So having a way for people to commute all the way from the river back to St. Charles Avenue, where you could catch the St. Charles streetcar and then go further out or go back into town, made perfect. That was a good way to make a buck, for the streetcar guys. So New Orleans and Carrollton starts out as a steam railway in 1831. Can you imagine living in one of those real nice houses on St. Charles Avenue and a steam train is going by? Yeah, that lasted about 15 years. Even then, when there was nothing in between, the people who were there were like, you gotta be kidding me. So of course, they backtracked, put in the mule car operation in 1845. Once you had the mule cars, of course, then it was easier to set up the branch line down Napoleon. So at the same time as building or laying down the track for the Napoleon line, for the branch line, at the same time, New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad Company also built a big barn. Actually, basically what they did was they bought up the corner of St. Charles and Napoleon. And on one side, on the lake side of St. Charles and Napoleon, they put a whole bunch of shops and offices and stuff and such. And on the riverside of St. Charles and Napoleon, they built a big old streetcar barn. We're going to zoom in again on this little segment so you can see it a little better. So here is the Napoleon branch route, a little bit larger, a little bit more zoomed in. So you can see, starting on the left-hand side of this segment of the Robinson Atlas, that's St. Charles, where you see the tracks going top to bottom. And then you see it curving off, see the tracks curving off onto Napoleon, and then running down Napoleon to the river. Just above Napoleon there, just in the block between Napoleon and Berlin Street. Berlin Street, ring a bell. Berlin Street's kind of hard. Why was it Berlin Street? Because Berlin was one of Bonaparte's victories. Did you ever think about the streets that are up there? Napoleon, Austerlitz, Marengo, Constantinople, Berlin. All of these were cities that from 1804 to 1812, there is a Moscow. Anyway, all of those were Napoleon's victories until 1917, and the U.S. is about to enter World War I. And who are the bad guys at that point? Secretary, come on. So yeah, Southern ain't that. But anyway, so that first block though, you got Napoleon, and then go one block towards Canal, and that was Berlin Street, now Jefferson Parish. So that block right there, that's where the streetcar barn was. You may be familiar with that block if you're of an age where you spent some time at Fat Harry's, or now you have a little more money and you can afford something a little more than cheese fries at Fat Harry's. You're going to Superior Seafood on the corner. And in between, of course, that was Copeland. I always thought that was of Chase as well. But that's a story too. So that's the streetcar barn right there. The big dot, it looks like a whole bunch of lines are going into the building. That dot is a turntable. Anybody get to San Francisco, rip the cable car all the way down to Fisherman's Wharf, down to basically to the end of the line, and you get down, and what do you see? You see a turntable. And what do? They roll the streetcar up on the turntable, and the guys literally walk the car around to change it in direction. Well, you had to do the same thing with those old mule-drawn streetcars. They weren't double-ended because it was only one mule, and you weren't going to unhook them. So you walked the streetcar onto the turntable, and you didn't have to do anything. All you had to do was leave the mule. The mule was going to pull the streetcar on the turntable. But that's that dot that you see there where Fat Harry's is now, leads into the streetcar barn. You'll see it's hard to see down on the other side, but there's another black dot down at Chapatulas in Napoleon. That's the other turntable. And so the mule-drawn streetcars rely on those turntables to turn everything around. There was another one on Canal Road, and that's on the St. Charles line. St. Charles line didn't go on St. Charles Avenue downtown for years. Because it would get to, it would come up the Pointers, split off, and go down the Road Street at that point. So the line basically starts there at St. Charles Avenue, follows down. You see it goes past St. Stephen's Church, Lawrence Square. There, that's Lawrence Park. That's that little park that's a magazine in Napoleon to this day. Just behind it, let's see, was it just behind it is Cox? And then kind of wrapped all around it is St. George's, right? So, it's like pretty much what's not, the Cox were there first. And so St. George's started buying up everything for the school and all of that stuff around it over time. So that's basically what you're seeing there. And then, of course, right there behind Lawrence Park was the Jefferson City Public Market. It's the gym for St. George's. The building is still there. That was the public market. So we had the French market, the Tremaine market. We had St. Mary Market down on Poitras, close to the Poitras Market by Poitras and Claiborne, actually Poitras and Barone. So this, of course, was one of the public markets. Circle Food Store was the St. Bernard Public Market. The Jefferson City Public Market was in this building. A lot of it started out a lot of open air stuff and everything, but then as air conditioning, as commercial air conditioning grew, they kind of turned into public supermarkets in a way. And then John Schweigman decided that was real bad. So, yeah, that kind of put a stop to the whole concept at that point. The streetcars that were used. That's my first one. Jerry taught me how to use a particular colorization program. I was very pleased with how that came out. This is a bobtail, what's called a bobtail streetcar from Stevenson Streetcar Company of New York City. And basically it's, when we say mule-drawn streetcar, just about every streetcar operator from the 1840s, from 1845, when the Carrollton line started using mule-drawn cars, all the way up to 1893, 1895, when these folks start electrifying. These are about the only streetcars, the only model streetcar that was here because they weren't. And the mules could pull it, it was a good weight, even loaded, everything else. The back of the streetcars to the left, the front is to the right in this photo. So you would board and exit in the back of the car. The front with that rounded front vestibule, that's where the operator stood. Can't call him a motorman unless you wanted to give the mule a lot more credit than, I don't know, the mules probably deserve the credit, that's for sure. But yeah, the operator would sit there below that white number 35, He'd be there in that vestibule. You'd hook up, hitch up a mule to the streetcar, give him the reins. That big handle there, that's the brake. Because really, if the mule had gone crazy, basically lost it, that kind of thing, basically what he would do is he'd pull the plug, unhitch the mule, let it go, and then hit and pull the brake to stop the car or something along those lines. So these cars ran on St. Charles on the Carrollton line. You see the initials of the company at the bottom there, New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad. This is St. Charles and Napoleon in 1860. So those buildings that are now, what do they call that? Sacred Heart Academy bought that. It's the lower school, which is First Baptist Church. It was First Baptist Church, right? And then that Sacred Heart bought it, and now it's their pre-K through 7 or 8 there. Well, that wasn't even a twinkle in anybody's eye yet, because this was those shop buildings there on the right-hand side. Here's a little reverse of it now. That's Napoleon Avenue running top to bottom, and St. Charles running left to right. So New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad built this big streetcar barn where Fat Harry's is now on the riverside of St. Charles and Napoleon. Office buildings and other shop stuff right there where that Sacred Heart Lower School is now. That all started getting built out with the Napoleon branch in 1850. This is what the neighborhood looked like by 1883 with the Robinson Atlas. The Robinson Atlas was a fire insurance map. Robinson was a map company that made detailed maps with pipes and routing and that kind of thing. They were a competitor to Sanborn. And City of New Orleans Metairie Archives has this full set of plates from 1883 that it's invaluable in terms of research and everything else. Okay, so 1850 to 1893, those mule-drawn streetcars ran on St. Charles, ran on the Napoleon branch. That's how you got around. Wasn't exactly the most comfortable and or pleasant ride. You were behind a mule in July. I'll let you do the calculations, right? It wasn't exact. But hey, you were working on the river. You were working building the Montleon Hotel, which you lived uptown. You rode home and you probably needed a shower when you got home anyway, so you survived, right? In 1893, well, actually, commercial electrification begins in the late 1870s. By the 1880s, any photos, you see big light poles on Canal, on St. Charles, everything else. That does not come to the streetcar until 1893. Why? Because electrification is expensive. And car fare was not supposed to be expensive. So they kept running the mules until it got to the point where the city was like, no, everybody else has electric streetcars. They improved the schedule, they improved the timing, everything else. We need to do that, right? So electrification of the Carrollton line begins in 1893. And this is what I was saying, is that the Napoleon branch is actually the first piece, because the power comes from that building at Chop and Napoleon there. Put a big rectifier in the middle of the building and basically ran the wires out from Chop and Napoleon up Napoleon Avenue to St. Charles, and then hooked that to the electric poles that powered the St. Charles line at that point. The original streetcars were what are called the 1894 Brill cars. Brill Car Company manufactured them. That's one of them right there. That's what they look like. So they didn't, from a size standpoint, they weren't all that much bigger than the bobtails, than the mule-drawn cars, because the turn radiuses and everything else made sense to have streetcars about the same size. A year later, the Ford, Bacon, and Davis cars come into being. Ford, Bacon, and Davis were three construction engineers out of New York City, and they were big time by the 1890s. They were They were doing, they were bidding on street work and consulting work all across the country. They were brought into New Orleans to rethink a lot of the things that were going on because electrification, they knew that this stuff would have to come together. One of the things that Ford, Bacon, and Davis did was they designed a streetcar specifically for New Orleans. It becomes what we know as the Ford, Bacon, and Davis single truck streetcar. You ever see RTA 29, the little car that doesn't look like all the other green streetcars? That's a Ford, Bacon, and Davis 1894 car that was a little bit later than these grill cars that started the whole thing. At the time, with electrification, New Orleans and Carrollton could run the streetcar from Choppin' Napoleon, up Napoleon, turn it on to St. Charles, go all the way into town, and then go up to go all the way up to Canal Street at that point. It's a blueprint from Nazi of the car. You'll see, you gotta love the expansion of the name now. NOCNLRR, New Orleans, Carrollton, and Light Railroad Company. Because the largest consumer of electric power at the time are the streetcars. A lot of people didn't have electrification, didn't have electric power in their houses at this point. Here's a car running on from the Napoleon branch line all the way to Canal Street. This is another one that I colorized from a black and white photo, because if you look at the black and white photo, you look at these photos, and New Orleanians in particular, we look at old streetcar pictures, and what color do you see when you look at that picture? Green. That's exactly right. But you know what? It wasn't. The colorization routine got it right, because while some of the streetcar operators were running the green that we now know as our venerable green streetcars, a lot of them weren't. People were like, why the heck did the city pick red for Riverfront and then later Canal? It's because those back of town lines for the New Orleans City and Railroad Company were red at the time. Well, New Orleans and Carrollton had a mix of green and yellow streetcars. So anyway, this is one. That car started at Choppin' Napoleon and made its way all the way back to the Napoleon Yard. That building's still there. Next time you're going to Tips, next time you go to Walmart, go walk across the street, and you'll see that building still there. Actually, it's hard to see because they don't light it up, but there's still a public service electric sign behind the building that said public service. RTA didn't change it. They didn't. I was talking to some guys years ago. They didn't have the heart to change it. They were like, "No, that's a cool sign. Maybe one day we'll find money to light it up again, or something like that." Right? That building's still there. In the middle of that building was hooked up a big rectifier that would generate the 600-volt DC power that was necessary to run the streetcars. The streetcars all ran DC. Of course, power going to houses was alternating current, was AC. So you ran electric power that was generated in other locations, ran to this building, this big old giant electric rectifier in the middle of the building, and then basically run power out from there. Behind it was a yard with a bunch of streetcar, with a bunch of streetcar tracks, just like you would see at, didn't see an outside lot, streetcar tracks at Carrollton Station. You had some at Arabella. Anybody remember Arabella before it was the Whole Foods, right? It was, you had the block behind the station was nothing but tracks, and Canal was the same way. Old Canal Station, you gotta love that one, right? Old Canal Station was built in 1861 when they built the Canal Street line. Parts of that building were still there. Nazi decided they need to tear it down because they don't want anybody getting the idea that we could bring back the canal line after they already ripped it all up because they wanted the buses over there. So they tear everything down. So of course, what do we do in 2004? Build another, because that's when the streetcar came back. Anyway, so the building's still there. It was used for office space for years. Once the power generation and power operations for the streetcars moved it over to Market Street. Everybody knows the big Market Street power building, it's the one with the two big smokestacks by the river. Even if you didn't know that till just now, it's the building with the two big smokestacks that are by the river. Well, that power plant was so big that when they wanted to run electric streetcars in Algiers and Gretna, they simply ran underground electric cables under the river back over to the West Bank from that power plant to power all the streetcars on the West Bank. Gotta love it. It's like, why build something else? We got enough over here.
What are the cross streets there?
Okay, that's going to be, the yard is going to be Napoleon. So this is going to be Berlin or Jefferson Parish on this side. The Royal Blue Line. Okay, everything we're talking about prior to 1903, from 1850, mule cars, electrification in the 1890s, all of this is that one segment that ran from St. Charles and Napoleon down to Chop and Napoleon. It's typical of all of the other neighborhoods in New Orleans. There was nothing there. It was like in 1861, when the canal line first started, they built the streetcar barn there at, between Salcedo and White Streets. They said, this is good enough. We'll just run back into town. And then somebody said, wait a minute. I need to go see my mama in the cemeteries. So 6 months later, what happened? They had to run all the way to City Park Avenue. There was nothing else in between yet. But I had to go see my mama in St. Patrick #1, right? So they got to run the streetcar down. You kind of get the idea. Same thing happened with the rest of Napoleon Avenue. There really wasn't enough there yet to make that money. But by 1903, a group of businessmen forms another railroad company, another streetcar company. And they decide they're going to run a streetcar line from St. Charles and Napoleon out, up toward Lake Pontchartrain. They called it the Royal Blue Line. Where did they get that name from? The heck? You say Royal anything and New Orleans, and you start thinking purple, green, and gold. You don't think blue. There really was a Royal Blue Line. It was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
Monopoly.
Monopoly. That's, yeah, exactly. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, their colors were royal blue, a lighter, almost pastel blue, and white. And they painted the top line trains that ran on the P&O in that royal blue. So you would say, take the Royal Blue Line. So you got a bunch of businessmen. Anybody watching the Gilded Age? All the railroad guys and everything, the Vanderbilts. That's these guys, okay? That's the mindset. Let's make a railroad, you know, and maybe we'll make money, you know, that kind of thing. So what do? They say, let's give it a highfalutin name. We'll call it the Royal Blue Line. Well, there wasn't a lot of blue at that point. You saw the streetcars from New Orleans to California. They were yellow. The other New Orleans Railway and Light cars were the Pearly Thomas cars and the Palace cars, which were the olive drab greenish type stuff going on. But they said, now we're gonna call this the Royal Blue Line. What they did was, you know how every bus right at top has the route, has what used to be called the roll board, because it was a big roll and you rolled it, so you got Canal, Esplanade, you kept rolling to see Napoleon. Well, what they would do on the cars when they were running on the Napoleon line was they would take a piece of blue tinted glass and put it in front of the roll board. So that was the Royal Blue Line, because Napoleon was written in blue. So here's how the Napoleon line worked. Down at the bottom there, forgive my, I can't draw a straight line. I have excuses, but anyway, I don't have a note from a teacher because most of the teachers at Brother Martin would probably throw something at me if I would say, would you write me an excuse for that one? Down at the bottom of that map is the river. So that's Chaptoolis and Napoleon. So the Royal Blue Line absorbed the branch line, ran Chaptoolis and Napoleon to St. Charles, further up. That little bump that you see in the middle there, that's the turn at Broad and Napoleon. St. Matthias Church? Yep. Everybody with
Yeah.
that's got another name now, and I can never remember. Blessed Trinity? Oh, like I'm gonna remember. Yeah. Well, like, these are cast. She works at it, so she has to. But anyway, same mistake. Makes that turn right there, and then you head up. You go like what, two blocks on Broad Street, and then you curve back on Washington. So it makes that little curve, and then it heads up Washington. That next bump or that next curve is South Carrollton Avenue. So now you hit Carrollton Avenue, and when you hit Carrollton Avenue, you hit the farthest end that Pontchartrain Boulevard went. Now that's going to be a tough one for a lot of people to process. Pontchartrain Boulevard going all the way up to Carrollton Avenue. But that was how the New Basin Canal ran until it curved to come back into the turning basin on South Rampart Street. So it was still Pontchartrain Boulevard. You don't even think about that. I don't think about that because it's been the expressway since what, 1952. So we don't really put that together. But that was a piece of Pontchartrain Boulevard that basically ran. So hits that second bump, that's Carrollton, runs all the way up, and then you see where the red line makes a big left turn, that's Metairie Road. We'll talk about the Metairie extension. I'll zoom the map out again for that. But that's where it makes the left turn and goes into that. This line was huge. So in 1903, it starts. They absorbed with New Orleans Railway and Light. The whole thing by 1906 is running the entire length of Napoleon to Broad, to Washington, up Washington to Carrollton. Carrollton makes that little hook and then goes up Pontchartrain Boulevard to Branley Road. Here's another art truth. There's a reason why, for all of the fact that we had different kinds of streetcars prior to 1922, 1923, when the art truth cars took over, there just aren't a lot of photos of them. Because we still run these guys to this day, right? So there's just tons more pictures. By now, this is a picture from the 30s. They had kind of given up on the whole, well, they still called it the Royal Blue Line for a good long time, but they gave up on the line. You know, you'll notice there isn't a tint or anything in the glass there for the roll board. It just said Napoleon because this was, what is this? This is not 956. This car could have been running on Napoleon one day, on St. Charles the next day, and then Magazine the day after that. A lot of times they didn't because the ads were targeted. When you think Facebook was good, you should read some of the stuff about some of these guys who are targeting ads on the streetcar. Yeah, Facebook's had nothing. Ad companies, let me tell you. Here's Magazine Napoleon from 1947. You might recognize that big tall building in the back. That's St. Stephen's. It's St. Stephen's after they built the steeple. The steeple went up in, I think, 1928 or something. I've got a picture of St. Stephen's without the steeple. It's the weirdest darn picture you've ever seen because you look at it, you know, I used to teach at Redeemer High School back in the 80s, right? That was Redemptorist and St. Joseph Academy basically combined at the time. So all the uptown kids were coming from St. Stephen's and St. Stephen's and St. Alphonsus and such. And yeah, it's like I showed them that picture one time. Yeah, kid. Anyway, you get the idea. So this is Magazine and Napoleon. You can see the track curving off so that it can go onto Magazine Street if necessary for detours and that kind of thing. That streetcar is heading back down to Chocolate Napoleon. The streetcar on the other side is outbound, and east, let's see, that was 47, so that's gonna go to Broad Washington. Color picture, Kodachrome. Most of the time, you spend the money on your grandkids to take Kodachrome pictures or something like that. And occasionally, we get some good streetcar pictures that were in color. Here's 943. Again, we say these, Nazi 943, Nazi 956. It's all of the 1922-23 vintage Archer streetcars. At the time, there were over 400 of these streetcars. By 1964, they kept 35 of them for St. Charles, and everything that was left was basically cut in half to make sure nobody got the idea of trying to bring them back. Oh, don't even start me, believe me. Palace streetcars. St. Louis Car Company designed the Palace streetcar for the 1905 Louisiana Purchase Louisiana Purchase Exposition, basically the bicentennial of the Louisiana Purchase for all intents and purposes. It was in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Louis Car Company made a 10-mile streetcar route around the fairgrounds, the exposition grounds in St. Louis. Some guys from New Orleans went up to check all of that out, fell in love with this streetcar design, ordered a bunch of them for New Orleans, and they basically brought them down right after the fair. In 1905, they started running here. They ran till 1935 and got phased out. They were called the Palace cars because riding in it was like a king riding in his state coach. They were comfortable, they were wide, good suspension. It's just, especially if you were going out to Metairie, the marketing on that was a pretty good idea kind of situation. They ran mostly on the Esplanade Canal belt lines for years. When Nazi discontinued streetcars on Esplanade Avenue and converted Esplanade to buses, they had a surplus of the Palace cars, and the logical place to move them was to move them onto Napoleon, because that was one of the. This is just as they're canceling the Metairie extension of the streetcar, but still just comfortable streetcars. Blueprint of the Palace cars, just big, comfortable. I mean, comfortable by streetcar standards. It's like, if you get on the streetcar by Camellia Grill and you get off on Carondelet Canal, yeah, you're kind of rubbing your hips a little bit by the time that finishes. Route changes over the years. The first thing to go, of course, was the Metairie extension. At the end of 1934, the Metairie extension of the Royal Blue Line is converted to buses. That's when the Metairie Road bus starts. If you live down in that neighborhood, the Metairie Road bus is probably near and dear to your heart. We live closer to the lake. The Veterans bus was near and dear to my heart and my legs coming home from Gentilly.
Is that Gennaro's in the background?
Sure is.
That's my dad's truck stop.
Is it really? Yep. I'll be there. Okay. That's why I just love doing things like this. It's like me. Yeah. I don't know from uptown in a lot of ways. I gotta tell you, I didn't live uptown. Like I lived more up in the dirt. Yeah, Broad Washington. That's right. That's exactly. That was the end of the line in 1940 because it had been cut back that far. So the first cut, of course, was to get rid of the Metairie extension. Then in 1937, it was shortened from basically the Napoleon line was taken off of Pontchartrain Boulevard so that it ended at Carrollton and Washington. And then it was further cut back to Broad Washington in 1940. And so if you talk to your grandpa or something like anybody older, well, that's still too old for me, right? But you talk to folks who were around, or you remember talking to folks who were around at the time, that's where they would remember the Napoleon line terminated. And so basically, double-ended streetcar, you bring it up, just like you go to Carrollton Claiborne now, and the streetcar pulls in, pull down the pole, let back the pole that's now the back of the streetcar, off you go again. Here's 969 at Washington and Broad. Telling you those ads and targeted Regal beer. You know why Regal? You know why I call it Regal? Yeah, it's lager backwards. Tell me that's not imaginative, creative, and madman from Madison Avenue. Need a name for our company. Well, what do? You write it up on a blackboard somewhere and you start playing jungle, right?
Yeah.
And somebody just did it straight back and says, hey, that's lager. Lager backwards is Regal. So here's Washington and Broad, 1949, just 4 years later, the streetcar would be cut back and discontinued. If you lived uptown, that might ring a bell. Some people might have been born there that are in this room. Yep, there we go. Yep, at the time, this is 1946, I believe, for this photo. So, of course, it's still Southern Baptist Hospital, not the Baptist campus of the Star Trek board that we now call Oxford Medical. It pretty much has absorbed everything. It's the law. Let's talk about the Metairie extension for a little bit. Okay. The streetcar ran from Chopping Napoleon all the way up to Metairie Road. Napoleon, turn on Broad, turn on Washington, turn on Carrollton, turn on Pontchartrain, come all the way here now to that path that's going from the bottom of the map up to where it makes a big left turn. That big left turn, that's Metairie Road. Now remember, this is designed as a Nazi map. So it's not meant to have like topographic, geographic references. The line is coming from the right-hand side. That's City Park Avenue. So that's City Park Avenue coming to that point where it makes a right turn and goes north, goes up. That's West End Boulevard. That's the West End streetcar. In between, that little bit of white, that's the new canal. That's the new basic canal. They didn't need it. It's the Nazi map. They didn't care about those. They cared about the streetcars. They didn't care about the canal right there, but that's basically it. So that horizontal line, streetcar comes up, makes a left turn. That's Metairie Road. That's Metairie Road by Metairie Cemetery with the country club on the riverside. If you're looking for a reference to get a fix of where we're talking about. So the streetcar comes up from Chopping Napoleon. It's all the way there to what would basically be under the I-10 overpass right now. Would hang a left and head out to Metairie. So it heads out to Metairie. That dotted line that you see just past the straight part of Metairie Road, which is Metairie Cemetery, and you get Neighborhood Road, 17th Street Canal, which is not on this map, but paired streetcars, and so out into Jefferson Parish. You curve up. Why does Metairie Road have that big curve? The bayou, right? It followed the riverbed. It followed the stream bed of Bayou Metairie. So basically, that's why Metairie Road is what it is, and that's also why the parish moved all the Mardi Gras parades up to Veterans, because that street drove them crazy for a good 40 years, 30 years. Anyway, get the idea. So it starts running initially to 17th Street Canal, basically runs to the end of the cemetery. Then in 1915, they made the decision to continue in what was called the Shrewsbury extension of the Napoleon line, all the way out to what is now that candy store at Severn and Airline Highway. Yeah. So ran all the way out there, little 2-track terminal, same kind of deal. Pull in, pull it down, let it up, go from there. Metairie extension, we think about it running on Metairie Road, it didn't really run on Metairie Road. It was an off-street route. Just like the West End streetcar did not run on West End Boulevard. It ran just to the east of West End. So the road went out to the lake, and the streetcar track was next to it in the dirt. Same thing here. The streetcar ran just above the street. This is an ad for Crestmont Park at Metairie Ridge. Right there by that area between Conifer and Metairie Road, and that whole little area that was called Crestmont Park. It wasn't anything in 1950, but they were advertising every day. Come get on the Royal Blue Line and come pick out your lot where you're going to build your house in the suburbs and that whole bit.
That's the public school they just tore down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, sort of.
A while ago, they tore it down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they tore that down, and then it became the building that they tore down again.
Right, right.
Here's the zooming. That was Metairie High School, which later became Metairie Junior High, and then when Lefty Haynes passed away, because he was on the school board, they named it Lefty Haynes Junior High. Then Gilda passed away, and it was George and Gilda Haynes, George and Gilda, and of course now it's just Haynes Academy. And well, yeah, enough said on that. You can see the dotted line above Metairie Road. Now, the way this worked was it was one streetcar track that they operated the one streetcar track with two what were called passing sidings on different points. You know where the 800 block, where Langston's is on one side, and the TJ's and the CC's, and then Metairie Village on the other side? There was one section there that was a passing siding. The one track split into two so that an outbound car could go on one side and allow the inbound car to go past, and then they could continue, or vice versa. There was a second passing siding just before Bonneville Boulevard, same idea. So you have one streetcar pretty much running the bulk of the route, except for those passing sidings. You could allow one to pass from the other. So there's a Crestmont Park development, and of course, yeah, that was old Metairie High School. This is, to my knowledge, the only photograph of the Metairie streetcar tracks, and this is there by Metairie Ridge. You can see the street on the side. That got ripped up pretty quick, and Metairie Road, well, actually, that became part that's pretty much where the new drive-in is now, something like that. I don't know where you found this picture, but bless you for finding it, because this one's perfect. This picture tells a huge story about New Orleans that goes beyond just Metairie Road in 1909. We talk about some of these big streets like they were nice and they were clean and they were blacktopped or they were paved. Not a chance. Okay, that was Metairie Road in 1909. You're trying to get your early automobile down there. Of course, what did we see when we come back? That's going to be shells at this point, right? They kind of figured that out, that you could dredge the clamshells out of the lake and not have this nightmare. The streetcar is off to the left behind the bushes. You can see the light poles in the back there. That's where the streetcar track was. That was a little better maintained than the street. You know why? Because Nazi was, the New Orleans Railway and Light was running. You didn't want the streetcar derailing like you would have your wagon go under in that particular mess. This tells a story, though, because those streets were like this. They were a hot mess like this all the way up to and through the Depression. These streets didn't get paved from Metairie to Lakeview to Gentilly until 1939, 1940, with the Works Progress Administration, Depression-era construction stuff, and they started paving up everything at that time. Streetcars to buses and the conversion. Of course, the first one was Metairie Road. in 1934. This is a 1960 picture. The buses had not changed all that much in those 26 years either. See old white bus company buses. Remember the maroon and cream buses? Yep. Even when I was at Brother Martin in the mid 1970s, Cartier and the Lake bus lines, we're talking, this is 1973, and they were still running those because they basically, Cartier bus line with a feeder just go from Gregory Junior High to JFK, right? They weren't using the air conditioned buses on us at that point, right? We rode the old maroon and cream. I love the color. The color scheme's gorgeous. It's one of the biggest challenges with colorization. It's like, if I could basically, I knew I could do this, and I knew the software wasn't a bad idea when I could take a maroon and cream bus and have the routine do it right. That was wonderful. Here's Metairie Road. Imagine two buses and that big DeSoto or whatever the heck it is. All on that. Good luck with that, right? But anyway, yeah, so conversion there. This is a GMC New Looks bus in 1978, outbound. Behind it there, you're under the I-10 overpass, and that's the train tracks that Amtrak goes out toward the lake at that point. So that bus is outbound. It's just become City Park. It's that conversion City Park Avenue, Metairie Road. It's basically in the middle of the New Basin Canal at this point. How do we know that this picture is 1978? Yeah, that was Dutch's first run for mayor. So the ads started going up in late 1978, and the rest of that story. Beacon Restaurant. Oh, yeah. This is 1954. The streetcar line was converted at the end of 53. There was no big need. Canal Street was the problem. There were people that would have, they were really worried that the preservationists and everybody else would put up a fight on Canal Street. Not so much with all the other lines. They took their time. It's like, say, okay, we'll run the buses now. Everybody else is like, let me get this straight. You're going to give me an air-conditioned bus? Yeah, it didn't take long to convince people that was a good idea. So here we see the Beacon Restaurant. They're ripping up the streetcar tracks, a little bit of drainage work in front of the restaurant. I colorized that one because the sign was gorgeous on that. Here's another photo from the same set, basically looking from the neutral ground at the front of the Beacon. I never had the pleasure, of course, because this is 1954, and I wasn't even a twinkle in my old man's eye yet. 1973, this is a GMC, what we call New Looks buses. If you're my age or in that general vicinity, you will remember these. These are the buses that killed the Canal Streetcar. In no uncertain terms, they are what killed the Canal Streetcar. Why? Because if you lived at West End in Harrison, or if you lived on Canal Boulevard in Fillmore, and somebody said, I will give you a bus with air conditioning that you can get on here and not get off until Carondelet and Canal. What streetcar? Huh? Streetcar? What are you talking about? That's what killed the Canal Streetcar. Don't listen to anything else. They did it right. They offered New Orleans air conditioning. And you know what we did? Sign me up. You know, you see those memes that guy's got a lot of cash and it says, take my money. Okay, that's exactly it. So that's a New Looks bus from 1973. He's on Napoleon. He's about to make the turn onto Claiborne, because at this point, the bus line was running from up Napoleon Avenue to Claiborne. We make the left turn on Napoleon and head to Claiborne in Carrollton. And you can, to this day, that's where a lot of buses still pull in, is right there. This is that terminal at Carrollton is Claiborne. So you see the bus would come in here, he'd pull into the terminal, wait there, and then go back, basically start the run back from there, go back down Claiborne to Napoleon, like 5 school zones. And you're gonna forget one of them. You're gonna get one of those letters in the mail saying pony up $120. Okay, it's crazy, right? But I take, to this day, I can take the bus.
Is it Dr. Frank or?
Oh, it sure is, look at that. Oh my God, yeah, some of those old ads, I love them. I suspect that this particular photograph was taken on Carnival Day, 1973,
Oh,
because that street is filthy. That is filthy. That is filthy by anybody's standards in New Orleans, right? So I suspect that photo was shot on Mardi Gras Day. Napoleon line has now been merged with the Broad bus. So remember, Broad, lower line to Michoud. You can literally get on the bus 2 blocks from Dominican High School and end up at Michoud. Across the street from Dominican. Yeah, you're right. All the way out to Michoud. It was insane. Okay. Just like, so I went to Brother Martin, right? So I had friends that were, of course, had tons of friends who lived out in the East who all went to Resurrection. And of course, that's how they got to Brother Martin, was come down Metairie, Gentilly Road, get off the Legion Fields. That bus kept going all the way. You could live in Jefferson Parish and end up in Dominican. And a lot of people did. So anyway, so now the Broad line goes out to the boondocks. It gets to Napoleon. It turns at Napoleon and then heads down to the wall. Facilities. We've already looked at, so just a little quick thing here. We've already looked at the building at Shop. It was called the Napoleon Yard for years after basically after the Napoleon line was discontinued. They didn't need the yard anymore. That building became what was called the training building. They took an old 1905 grill streetcar, put in all the controls from a archery, from a Pearly Thomas streetcar, put it in that big area where that big rectifier was big enough to hold a streetcar inside. And then they hooked it up like, the Star Wars simulator at Disney, where it's all on shock absorbers and move it this way or that way. They set up a streetcar like that so it would jolt, bolt, move around and everything and stay in place. That's how they trained the motormen at the time at that location. That is a streetcar right there. Actually. It's a hoist car. So if you had an overturned streetcar, they could dispatch that thing out to wherever. This is a shot of the Napoleon Yard looking from the building out to the storage tracks from 1950, 3 years later. All of those streetcars would get rerouted to Arabella or to Carroll Station. Will you be here next time? Derby is up again in September. Epidemics that shake New Orleans. Well, that sounds gruesome, but it's going to be a heck of a talk because the stories of yellow fever, Spanish flu, how these things changed our city are just incredible. So that's going to be September 18th. We're not going to wood back to Third Thursdays again. A word from the sponsor. Buy books. So the Brothers book is the top left. It's about St. Aloysius, Cartier Zoo, and Brother Martin High Schools. The middle book, my first book in 2004, New Orleans Canal Streetcar Line. Wrote it when the Canal Streetcar line came back. Maison Blanche Department Stores, Mr. Bingle is chapter 3. I used to work at the Clearview store. When I wrote an article for GoNola.com. My editor at Arcadia Publishing sent me back my article, and she says, "This is your next book." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Department store books make money." I'm like, okay. She's going to tell me that. Derby worked at MD too. Yeah, it's like he's got bad stories because he worked at MD too. But New Orleans Jazz. I originally pitched that book as a Treme book, and they said, "Come back, do it on jazz." And then went there looking at New Orleans like a big old who's who. Last book was Kraus Department Store. Subscribe to my mailing list. Want to know what I got guy.com. The next one drops on Thursday. We're gonna have more Napoleon stuff on it, another article about that. Shout out to the people who made the PowerPoint template. If you like this PowerPoint thing, just shoot me an email. I'll send it to you. And we're done.
Early fair.
Oh, wow. The earliest fair, John Cole for the paper, he actually, he wrote an article about this, he emailed me last year, and I actually looked it all up to verify it. The original steam fare for the Carrollton line was 75 cents in 1835. Yeah, do the math on that one and think about 7 cents to ride the belt in the 50s. Okay, it's gone, yeah. The most memorable fare, of course, would be the 7-cent fare from the end of World War II into the 50s. Leisure Field bought the quarter when I was in Brother Mark.
I was in the late 60s, and I thought it was a quarter too.
Yeah.
I had to make transfers.
Yeah.
Streetcar to $20 to the memory box.
Yeah, and yeah, so it would be a quarter and then a nickel for the transfer.
Yeah.
Unless you need to transfer out of the line. Yes, sir.
Where have you again? When you show it from the south, the north.
The whole streetcar line was on the north side, it was on the lake side of Metairie Road. And it ran all the way out to Severn, almost right to Airline Highway. Yes, ma'am.
Sign on Metairie Road, I think it's right above the press. Used to be, it's about the blue.
Well, look, that's Blue Line Sandwich Company. Right, that's the restaurant. And it's actually, yeah, they've got a good, neat little explanation of why they picked the name, because that's why I picked the topic when we were looking at doing it at the library. Right on too. Yes, sir.
It was the two-track operations from the top of this two that are expensive and then single track operations.
That's correct.
On the signs, since they only had two signs, how did they didn't have telegraph line, that wireless operators, how did they synchronize, where they be? So
Well, I guess the best way to say it is, I don't know if you ever saw a Nopsey motorman or a Nopsey bus driver with those really good pocket watches.
okay.
I'm serious, okay? Yeah, I am dead serious. I mean, I got this big old digital thing. And Chris says we're out. Thank you. Anybody else got a question? Come up to that one anyway. Thanks. Oh, what was that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Talking about this vehicle, the
Oh.
two daughters of Mr.
Emil Ali.
Speaking here in December.
Ooh.
It's on.
I don't remember their name, but his name was Emil A-L-L. Last.
Yeah.
And he was the puppeteer. Okay, Emil was the display guy for MB at the time. He goes up to Marshall Fields in Chicago in 1947, and he says, "Oh man, we could do better than this." He sketches Mr. Bingle on the train ride home. He pitches it to the MB execs at the time. They said, "Go for it." Then they said, "Well, we got to liven this up a little bit." So they found somebody to make a 15-inch doll out of the sketches. That was how it started. Okay, and then they said you gotta love this. I can't remember which one of those little guys it was. I have to look it up in the book. But they literally, Aline goes to the guy and says, "We're going to lunch." He takes him down to a strip club. This is in the days of late 40s, early 50s. Takes him to a vaudeville show. Okay, and Oscar is the puppeteer doing puppets in between the strippers. And they talked to Oscar, and he says, "Where did you buy these puppets?" "Well, they're all from Germany." So they contacted. That's how you got the puppet that was on TV and everything else. The daughters, if I remember correctly, have the original doll that's not the puppet.
I'm trying to talk to the British, they're gonna make the pieces, but, that's it.
The oldest Mr. Pickle I know of that's still around is Admire the Hat.
No?
They don't put it out though, because they used to put it out in the glass case in the middle. And then somebody told them, man, somebody's gonna, you know, there are people who are gonna break and steal that. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, oh, so much fun. Anyway, it's not bugging me about time. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yes, say, like, Washington.
Yeah,
You guys look at it, it's all that up to now.
right.
Streetcar on there, you want to put like there. You know, like, who's on the-
Yeah, no, what happened was, yeah, they kept going up. And then, you know where the nightmare that is now Carroll Interchange?
Yeah.
That was the new base of the canal. So it made the turn basically just before the canal. And then went down the road.
Cause you talked to them. before they-
You're absolutely good. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I looked at an old map, a friend and I, we like to do that, look at old maps, and there's the blue line on Metairie Road.
Right.
And at Fosis Street, there's a big circle on the map. And we don't know what that circle
Okay,
represents.
Fosis was actually a traffic circle at one point. And before that, it was the passing sign. So when they ripped up the passing sign,
Okay,
they turned it into a traffic circle. And of course, that was a disaster, because we all know how well New Orleans coped with the traffic circle.
so that was a circle. Okay.
You can still get self-killed on Harrison Avenue with City Park. Guys, thanks so much. Oh, yes, sir, one more.
Yeah, electric buses.
Yes,
Same color.
and right, it's the maroon and green, yeah. Trackless trolleys from St. Louis Traction Company. They ran on, Magazine, Ferret, St. Claude, and I'm forgetting one, but yeah, Tulane. Oh, Dumaine, yeah, that's right, City Park line, yeah.
Jackson.
Jackson, that's true, that's another one I never rode on, because I never had to go. Thanks again, guys, appreciate it, it's really been fun. Yeah, I'm gonna put it up, don't forget to try that top. I'm gonna put it up as a, PDF, so you can download the whole thing. What, and you?
Yeah. And mother. So. This is funny. We're taking up 2 weeks. What's that? Good seeing you.
Don't stop. I got it all. Yeah. The local right there off. I got what's the line? Well, that, I mean, schools are like fun, locked up, but the, again, the ancient local is right there on Main Street, on the, it's even. It's all right.
There was a picture in there where the windows had fallen.
Yeah, on the house.
My father had told me that it was around the corner.
Yeah, probably did. I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah, right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my father told me when he was born in 1940, so he drove that. But he
And
said,
now, thank you for,
thank you.
as
One-
usual, and you, and for everything. Thank you very much. Ronnie went to, as brother John used to say that. He went down south, so. When you went to Louisville, he got some of the proper education. You know. Yeah.
I started seeing.
I got stories from the cross folks. I got stories from their cousin or their uncle was down here because of the war, before embarkation. They would see those race screens that you move back, and Streetcar. Guys, you got some stats on you, armed stats on you. He takes one look at that. He picks the thing up and he pitches it out of the window. And he's like, he's sitting there, he's in his army uniform, right? And he's just looking at the motor and he's like, yeah, say, just go ahead and say something. Naturally, not yet.
This is amazing.
Oh, yeah. I did not put the press line. I have a version put it on Facebook just to start with from. At the top of the. Oh, yeah. That's a good work. What? I went too far.
Just crazy. Did you know that the width of the Metairie Road buses, the GM buses, is narrower than all the other Nazi buses?
That does not surprise me.
But Dad told me that, and they're the only ones that had license plates.
Yeah, because the other ones, nobody cared. But at some point, hang on.
Dad told me that you can see that the Metairie Road is a little bit narrower, but you mentioned,
Right.
there
There it is.
this is Genera's.
Yeah. What's Gennaro's before they moved out? Oh, that's Gennaro's before they went flat.
It's the interstate now.
Right.
On the other side. That's
So
where
where
the
is it? It's going wrong. Yeah, it's going wrong. And that. Oh, no, I know. No, that's the original. That's. This is 40 now, something, yeah. Yeah. All those places. Yeah, see, I think that. Yeah, that's a little further up. More like get off the ball.
That's, there was a Lefty standards at one time. I know that.
Yeah,
The sign.
that's somewhere, that's the guard and the ball.
Yeah,
Oh,
paint or something, so.
Yeah, it's off to the outside, yeah.
I thought that was gonna be the shopping center where, Conseco. You see how it juts out like that?
That's a shopping center that's inside of this building, that comes out this way.